Thank you. I ask unanimous consent that the chairman be authorized to declare a recess at any time during today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that the members not on the subcommittee be permitted to sit with this subcommittee at today's hearing and ask questions. Without objection, so ordered. As a reminder, if members wish to insert a document into the record, please also email it to documentsti@mail.house.gov. I now recognize myself for the purpose of an opening statement for 5 minutes. Today's hearing examines highway railroad grade crossing eliminations and safety improvements. There are approximately 112,000 highway rail grade crossings in the United States. In 2022, there were over 2,000 accidents at grade crossings, 2,000 of them in 2022. Grade crossing accidents and fatalities are entirely preventable. Shouldn't have any. States make the determination when it comes to addressing grade crossings, including weight and safety, railroad and vehicle traffic considerations. Eliminating a rail crossing where necessary and possible eliminates the potential for a grade crossing incident. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, IJA, created a new grant program known as the Railroad Crossing Elimination Grant Program, meant to help states and communities with grade crossing elimination and safety. The program received a total of over $3 billion over 5 years, or roughly $600 million per year. In fiscal year 2022, the Federal Railroad Administration awarded $570 million in railroad crossing elimination grants to projects in 32 states that addressed over 400 at-grade crossings. And my home state of Texas received roughly $86 million for 5 major grade crossing projects. It is expected that FRA will announce a notice of funding opportunity soon, seeking applications for more grade crossing improvement projects. I applaud that. We must ensure this process is transparent, easy to navigate, and that the money is accessible for all communities. It is my hope that the FRA will work with Congress to achieve these goals while properly overseeing this new grant program. Further, with the next surface transportation reauthorization fast approaching, it is time to begin examining these programs to understand what's working with them, the right levels of funding, and how to build on existing grade crossing elimination and safety efforts, such as Railroad Crossing Elimination Grant Program. I look forward to hearing the testimony of our witnesses today, and specifically, I am interested in learning about how existing programs can be improved, the resources that states and communities need, and how we can reduce government red tape to make these funds more accessible and the process less complicated. I now recognize Ranking Member Payne for 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank Chair Nels for holding this hearing. We are long overdue to discuss rail safety. I want to thank our witnesses for being here today. I especially want to thank NTSB Chair Ms. Hamady for her tireless efforts to keep us apprised of her agency's safety investigations. I also want to thank FRA Administrator Bowes for his increased focus on safety and implementing billions of dollars in bipartisan infrastructure law funding. As trains increase in length, they block grade crossings nationwide. Last year, this committee saw footage from Hammond, Indiana, of school children forced to crawl under parked freight trains to get to school. It was shocking. I am pleased to see that the bipartisan infrastructure law's Railroad Crossing Elimination Program is funding a project in Hammond that will eliminate one of these crossings and hopefully allow children to get to school safely without having to cross under rail cars. Freight railroads carry important cargo, and what they transport is often essential to our daily lives, but those long trains can and do have accidents. Ask the people of East Palestine, Ohio. Freight rail safety is a challenge to communities across the country. The committee received a letter this week from the National League of Cities imploring Congress to act on rail safety legislation. More than 1 in 10 cities has experienced a rail incident, and 64% of all rail incidents occur within city boundaries over the last 10 years. Without comprehensive rail safety legislation, we continue to allow local governments and first responders to face the daily rail derailments, deaths, and delays that have left communities frustrated. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to insert this letter into the record.
Without objection.
Since the Norfolk Southern derailment in East Palestine, there have been over 1,500 rail accidents. 1,500. In response, the FRA issued several rail safety advisories, including on the use and maintenance of hot-bearing wayside detectors, how cars should be organized on a train, including where empty cars should be placed, concerns with train length, and how to prevent weather-related accidents and incidents. The Biden-Harris administration acted on rail safety. Congress should act too. I'm glad to see railroads and rail unions have negotiated sick leave, but Congress can act here as well. I introduced legislation that would guarantee all freight rail workers 7 days of paid sick leave. Not only is sick leave a basic right, but it also helps prevent worker fatigue. I'm disheartened, however, that negotiations on the Class 1 railroads have stalled and regarding joining the confidential close call rail reporting system. This system is meant to provide rail workers a safe environment to report unsafe events and conditions. Without it, rail workers might not report near-miss incidents because they are afraid of retaliation. The Wall Street Journal reported that employees are rushed on equipment inspections. This program would provide a forum for employees to share the information with a neutral third party rather than having to ask for help in the press. I would like to ask for unanimous consent to insert this article into the record, along with 3 others from ProPublica that detail the troubling culture of minimizing railroad worker incidents and injuries.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I look forward to the hearing from all of our witnesses, and I yield back.
Thank you, sir. I now recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Larson, for 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chair Nels and Ranking Member Payne, for holding today's hearing on rail safety. And safety in every mode of transportation should always be this committee's top priority. Since the Norfolk Southern derailment in East Palestine, Ohio, committee Democrats have been calling for a rail safety hearing and rail safety legislation. In fact, in May of 23, every T&I Democrat signed a letter asking for a rail safety hearing, highlighting the dozens of outstanding rail safety recommendations from the National Transportation Safety Board. Today's hearing is an opportunity to learn about those recommendations and what Congress can do. Nearly 1 year ago, we all watched as a giant plume of toxic fumes was released into the sky after the train derailment in East Palestine. Fortunately, no one died in that derailment, but it remains a stark reminder why we need to be vigilant about rail safety. The NTSB held a field hearing in East Palestine and took the unusual step of initiating its own investigation into the safety culture of Norfolk Southern. This incident was by no means the only rail accident that occurred last year. There have been more than 1,500 train accidents since the one in East Palestine. Among those, a middle-of-the-night evacuation was required in Raymond, Minnesota, where a BNSF train derailed. A CSX derailment that required an evacuation of Livingston, Kentucky just before Thanksgiving. CSX had 3 employee fatalities last year, 2 of whom were conductor trainees in Maryland. And in Skagit County, Washington, in my district, BNSF had locomotives derail along Padilla Bay, spilling thousands of gallons of fuel. In Washington State alone, over the last 5 years, there were 193 train accidents, 71 grade crossing incidents, and 167 railroad right-of-way trespasser fatalities. Communities around the country are looking to Congress to act. Over 400 local officials sent a letter last March asking us to address rail safety, including Mayor Jeffrey Thomas of Monroe, Washington, and then Mayor Jill Boudreau of Mount Vernon, Washington. There's promising news. Over the last 40 years, railroads have seen a decline in the number of accidents or incidents. In 1983, the U.S. had approximately 20,000 rail accidents and incidents a year. Today, we're down to around 4,400. That is a significant improvement, but there is still an upward trend over the last decade in accidents and incidents per million train miles. And communities across the country face challenges with railroads blocking crossings. At least 37 states, including Indiana, Ohio, Louisiana, and South Dakota, have passed laws prohibiting stopped trains from blocking crossings, but railroads have fought state efforts in court. The problem is, including for communities in my district, there are no federal requirements. Block crossings pose safety risks. Frustrated drivers may attempt to clear the crossing before a train arrives, or pedestrians, including children on their way to school, as the ranking members pointed out, may crawl between stopped rail cars. There were more than 22,000 reports of blocked crossings last year, most due to a parked train. First responders have been unable to cross tracks, and nearly a quarter of the time pedestrians were observed on, over, or through the train cars. So while the bipartisan infrastructure law funding will help address these problems, public funding cannot be the only response to this issue. The BIL was a monumental achievement, a supercharged investment in rail with $102 billion in planned funding. Many of these investments will improve safety along with making service improvements. And to date, the FRA has announced about $26.7 billion in BIL funding for 238 rail projects nationwide. Among the recipients was the city of Burlington, Washington, in my district, which received a planning grant to identify which one of its 16 at-grade crossings is most suitable for a grade separation. I'm pleased the city is able to move forward now with this project thanks to BIL funding. I expect great results for communities from these grants and additional rail funding to come because there is more to do. I look forward to this committee passing legislation to address rail safety concerns, and this hearing and future discussions with communities who have rail service, the people who are impacted by derailments, and the employees who operate the railroads will inform the development of legislative solutions. With that, I want to thank the witnesses for being here today, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields. Thank you. I would like to now welcome our witnesses and thank them all for being here today. Thank you so very much. I'd like to take a moment and explain our lighting system to our witnesses. There are 3 lights in front of you. Green means go, yellow means you're running out of time, and red means conclude your remarks. I ask unanimous consent that the witnesses' full statements be included into the record without objection, so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that the record of today's hearing remain open until such time as our witnesses have provided answers to any questions that may be submitted to them in writing. Without objection, so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that the record remain open for 15 days for any additional comments and information submitted by members or witnesses to be included in the record of today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. As your written testimony has been made part of the record, the subcommittee asks that you limit your remarks to 5 minutes, please. With that, first we have FRA Administrator Bowes. We appreciate you being here. Thank you so much. And you are recognized for 5 minutes for your testimony.
Chairman Nels, Ranking Member Larson, Ranking Member Payne, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify this morning. It's an honor to return to this subcommittee and testify before you today about highway rail grade crossings. I want to thank the FRA staff who prepared me for this hearing in a short span of time. The Federal Railroad Administration accomplishes its core safety mission through the work of our safety professionals, partnerships with stakeholders, and investments in projects. Congress demonstrated its commitment to grade crossing safety and bolstered our nation's rail network when it passed the bipartisan infrastructure law 2 years ago. As a part of its historic investments in our rail network, BIL created the Railroad Crossing Elimination Grant Program to enhance community safety and improve the mobility of people and goods by implementing grade separations or closures and funding safety improvements at existing crossings. In June 2023, FRA announced our first railroad crossing elimination selections, awarding more than $570 million for 63 projects in 32 states that impacted over 400 at-grade crossings. This funding answers a real need. In 2022, there were more than 2,200 rail highway grade crossing collisions in the United States. FRA's public complaint portal received reports identifying more than 22,000 blocked highway rail grade crossing events. In addition to funding new projects, FRA is using its authorities to improve grade crossing safety in local communities. Over 2 years, FRA's increased our grade crossing and trespasser outreach division staff and nearly doubled our grade crossing inspectors. This staff spent weeks engaging in communities such as Birmingham, Alabama, Hammond, Indiana, and Houston, Texas, to address persistent blocked crossings. Earlier this week, they led a multimodal grade crossing symposium. FRA is also leveraging technology to improve grade crossing safety. For instance, FRA staff who spent weeks in Houston used the railroad's positive train control data to verify locations and durations of block crossings reported to FRA's public portal. FRA's Office of Research, Development, and Innovation developed the Rail Crossing Violation Warning System, which communicates the status of grade crossing systems to equipped approaching vehicles. And I believe that companies operating navigational applications could potentially enhance driver awareness of grade crossings, alert drivers to rail bridge clearances, and more. More broadly, FRA continues to use every resource we have to advance rail safety across the country. In June 2022, FRA finalized a rulemaking requiring railroads to develop fatigue risk management programs. As required by the new rule and the 2008 congressional mandate, FRA expects railroads to meaningfully consult with their employees when identifying and mitigating fatigue risks. We issued guidance to assist with that. FRA has completed or has underway additional rulemakings to respond to congressional mandates on emergency escape breathing apparatus, signal and dispatcher employee certification, and locomotive recording devices. FRA also completed several safety mandates from the bipartisan infrastructure law, including a report on block crossings and establishing a standardized process for including stakeholders such as labor organizations in accident investigations. We also issued a proposed rule establishing minimum crew size. In 2023, FRA has issued 7 safety advisories and 7 safety bulletins to nimbly address emergent safety issues. The past few years have been an extraordinary time for rail, responding to the COVID pandemic, working to address supply chain issues, completing labor management contract negotiations, responding to the Norfolk Southern East Palestine, Ohio tragedy, and implementing the bipartisan infrastructure law. FRA will continue doing our part. There are opportunities for railroads and Congress to do more to ensure rail safety, and we look forward to working with you all and enhancing the Secretary's safety push. I appreciate the opportunity to testify before you.
Thank you, Administrator Boss. Now I'd like to recognize National Transportation Safety Board Chair, Ms. Hamidi. Thank you for being here, and you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I want to start by thanking each of you for your continued work to improve safety at grade crossings, including the creation of FRA's Railroad Crossing Elimination Grant Program in the bipartisan infrastructure law. Outstanding work is also happening at the state and local level. Thanks to the efforts of Administrator Bose, then Acting FHWA Administrator Pollock, Governor Mike Parson, Missouri DOT Director Patrick McKenna, the people of Mendon, Missouri, and the critical efforts of Chairman Sam Graves, the state of Missouri acted quickly and decisively after Amtrak's Southwest chief collided with a dump truck in 2022, claiming 4 lives and injuring 146 others. Their work to improve the state's 47 passive grade crossings, supported by a $50 million investment, far exceeded our expectations. And as a result, we didn't issue any recommendations in the final investigative report. Also, as we discuss safety today, we need to keep in mind rail transportation is not only cleaner and more fuel efficient than transportation on our roadways, it's also far, far safer. That's true whether we're talking about transporting passengers or freight. We'd save so many lives if we could get people out of cars and onto trains and public transit. The fact is, the U.S. is facing a public health crisis on our roads. More than 40,000 people are killed every single year in preventable crashes, and millions more are injured. Grade crossings are among the deadliest spaces on our rail system because that's where our rails meet our roads. In fact, the rate of grade crossing collisions has increased by 34% over the past decade. Today, I'd like to highlight 3 areas where we see significant room for improvement: grade crossing design, technology, and rail worker safety. First, design. The safest grade crossing is no grade crossing. In a perfect world, our rail system would be completely separated from our roads. That means building overpasses and underpasses. But grade separation isn't always an option, which is why we've recommended converting passive grade crossings to active ones, increasing and improving signage, and ensuring proper road design so vehicles don't bottom out and become stuck on the tracks. The second area is technology. If you've ever used Waze, you'll notice it alerts drivers when they're approaching a grade crossing. That vital improvement is a result of a 2016 NTSB recommendation. We've called on other companies to do the same. Unfortunately, some of them, including Google, Apple, and Microsoft, have yet to implement our recommendations. For decades, we've also called on DOT to develop and test in-vehicle safety technology, like V2. We've also strongly support other life-saving technologies like positive train control. Current law requires the railroads to use PTC in established work zones to ensure worker safety. But under FRA regulations, they can circumvent that law by using train approach warning. That's when a lookout or watchman is assigned to protect workers who are maintaining the track. When they spot a train coming, sometimes at 110 miles per hour in one of our investigations, they're supposed to tell workers to move to a safe location. We've conducted numerous investigations where workers have died in extremely hazardous conditions as a result of train approach warning. In 2021, I wrote a letter to DOT and FRA imploring them to take action. Nothing's been done. I'd like to include that letter in the hearing record, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection.
Thank you. The NTSB has also called on FRA and the railroads to end the practice of allowing workers to ride on a rail car through a grade crossing. To be safe, workers must get off the train before it goes into the crossing. Unfortunately, we've also seen little action on these recommendations. The NTSB has over 190 rail safety recommendations that are currently open. We have 318 more recommendations that have been closed with no or unacceptable action. These recommendations, if acted on today, will save lives. There is no reason, none, to wait. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chair Hamady. I now recognize Mr. Jeffries, the President and CEO of Association of American Railroads. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chair Nels, Ranking Member Payne, members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today about grade crossing safety and broader trends across the freight rail industry. And I'll start with one unequivocal truism. Freight rail remains by far the safest way to move goods on land, especially hazardous materials. Railroads continue to hit high water marks in rates pertaining to mainline accidents, hazmat accidents, employee injuries, and others, yet more work remains to be done. Consistent progress is realized through our dedicated employee base, sustained private investment, and an overall safety culture that permeates all aspects of railroading. Rail workers are the tip of the spear, and I'm proud of the progress we're making on quality of life matters. To date, 80% of operating craft employees have new scheduling agreements to provide a more predictable work schedule for work-life balance, while 92% of covered rail employees have paid sick leave. Our actions in prevention, mitigation, and response, as outlined in my written testimony, demonstrate how much we can accomplish in a short period. Consider our work with first responders, over 2 million of which now have access to our Ask Rail software application to support them in the rare occurrence of an accident in their community. The next leap forward in safety requires innovation and deployment of myriad technological tools, many of which exist today. Technology allows us to conduct more in-depth inspections, advance operational processes, and reduce risk to our employees. And to achieve this, we must have regulatory partners that embrace and support innovation. Grade crossings, however, remain a key area of improvement for safety and community interaction. Consider that accidents at grade crossings and trespassing on railroad rights-of-way account for 95% of rail-related fatalities. Tragically, most of these accidents are preventable. In 2022, 66% of all highway rail crossing incidents and 82% of crossing fatalities occurred at crossings equipped with active warning devices. Carriers large and small work every day to improve safety around our crossings, and we also partner with the team at Operation Lifesaver to educate the public about this critical issue. Significant work remains, and policymakers play a unique role. That's because states, not railroads, are responsible for the road infrastructure at grade crossings and in deciding which grade crossings to prioritize for action. Congress and the DOT determine the dollar figures and direct them accordingly to support communities. Our members work closely with officials, spending hundreds of millions of dollars per year to improve crossings and generally maintain crossings and warning devices once they're installed. The number of gates at crossings has increased by 40% since 2005. Yet again, more work remains to be done. Railroads coordinate with state and local governments to plan and fund separation projects and closures while also working with law enforcement to address pressing concerns. And direct federal dollars are having a market impact. The IIJA allocates $245 million annually for the Section 130 program to install and upgrade warning devices. The law, as we've heard, also created a new grade crossing elimination program, providing $600 million per year in grants through 2025. The program remains fully subscribed, and last year the FRA announced its first grant awards, providing funds to improve grade crossing safety at some 400 crossings across 32 states. Because the safest crossing is no crossing at all, funding separations and closures is a primary goal. Which brings me to an issue I'd be remiss not to address, which is the topic of block crossings. There's no simple answer for solving this issue across a complex network. Yet today, every public grade crossing has a phone number and identification number to communicate crossing-related issues, and companies use this and on-the-ground information to identify solutions such as new technologies, investing hard dollars, or changing up operational flows. More progress is necessary, and working together we can achieve that. In closing, members of this subcommittee understand that railroads are safe, environmentally efficient, and critical to the U.S. economy. While we will continue to make progress through our own actions, we can also work together, facilitating smart safety improvements to save lives and minimize disruptions. Any legislative or regulatory efforts should be grounded in data and focused on desired outcomes. On the contrary, efforts that are focused on inputs and grounded in belief versus science are ill-advised and risk unintended consequences. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to our discussion today.
Thank you, Mr. Jeffries. I'd like to recognize Mr. Carson from Indiana to introduce our final witness.
Thank you so very much, Chairman Nels and Ranking Member Payne. Thank you for allowing me to introduce one of our witnesses today, Mr. Mike Smith from the great Hoosier State. He's the Commissioner of Indiana's Department of Transportation since 2022. Mike is responsible for NDOT's 3,500 employees and a $4 billion annual budget. Prior to his service in state government, he worked in the private sector with the nation's largest retailer with a degree in management from Indiana University's Kelley School of Business. Mike has been very focused on addressing the terrible problem our state faces with blocked railroad crossings. With more than 7,500 grade crossings, the fifth highest in the country, Indiana and Indianapolis are truly the crossroads of America, and it is my great honor to welcome this hardworking Hoosier to testify before our Rail Subcommittee today. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Carson. With that, Commissioner Smith, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Congressman Carson. Thank you, Chair Nels, and thank you to all the members of the committee for the opportunity to testify today. Concerning highway rail crossings and rail crossing safety, Indiana faces a unique challenge, but also immense opportunity. With Chicago, the nation's largest rail hub, near the Hoosier State, some of the busiest rail lines across our state, resulting in more than 7,500 highway grade crossings, the fifth highest in the United States. Over the last 2 decades, we've seen a decrease in the number of highway rail grade crossing collisions, and as a state, we've made great strides in our efforts to improve safety and mobility through crossing removals, grade separations, and other upgrades. Even as we gain momentum, Indiana still finds itself among the highest rate of incidents of rail crossing collisions, injuries, and fatalities on a year-over-year basis. As of November, there were 78 collisions at highway rail grade crossings, resulting in 12 fatalities and 20 injuries in our state. These numbers make it clear that there is more work to do. In Indiana, there are multiple agents of change underway, including our own local tracks rail overpass program, through which the agency serves as an example to others with an innovative program that promotes and encourages collaboration and teamwork amongst state entity, local entities, and the private sector. In 2018, Governor Holcomb and INDOT announced 12 local communities would receive awards for local tracks funding for grade separation, crossing closure, and other safety enhancements. Our total investment was $125 million, so $125 million of state investment and skin in the game in solving this problem. We anticipate that 11 of those projects will be underway by next year. One of the larger local tracks efforts is a grade separation project in Elkhart County. This more than $40 million construction project will construct a rail overpass to improve safety and mobility for motorists, pedestrians, and trains at 2 existing at-grade crossings. Multiple projects in Indiana were recipients of a total of $21 million in the Railroad Crossing Elimination grants from the FRA. One of those specifically was the Governor's Parkway Railroad Overpass, which Ranking Member Payne mentioned as a sticking point for students having to cross underneath train cars. The nearly $17 million project will eliminate 2 at-grade crossings, provide a safer, more efficient grade-separated overpass for all road users in the area where we have significant long-term train blockages. The state has also seen an exponential growth in the successful use of Section 130 Railway Crossing Program funds. Through this federal program, Indiana is on track to improve 85 of the top 100 most dangerous and high-risk public crossing areas over the next 5 years in our state. The state's data-driven approach and comprehensive planning efforts have resulted in 122 crossing improvement projects in just the last 3 years alone, including safety improvements such as installing warning bells, lights and overhead cantilevers, in addition to some of the larger and major improvements that I've already discussed. Indiana's efforts are outlined in the state's Highway Rail Grade Crossing Safety Action Plan. As we await final approval from that plan with the FRA, a variety of strategies have been identified, some of which include closing crossings, which is a great priority in our state, creating separations to eliminate the traffic between road users and trains, upgrading passive warnings to active, and engaging local agencies on traffic signal preemption. We're also proud of the work that we're doing on the South Shore Line to double track and make that facility more safe, which is on the way to being completed this spring or summer. The Westlake Corridor extension of that line to be opened in 2025, which is the largest investment in public transit and commuter rail in the state's history. And as a quick aside, my final item, on the way to Vision Zero, the agency and myself have set a goal of reducing fatalities and severe incidents across our network to include rail, bike ped, and highway safety over the next 10 years. I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Commissioner Smith. I thank you all for your testimony. We now recognize or turn to questions for the panel. I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes. Administrator Boss, the Railroad Crossing Elimination Grant Program is just over 2 years old, 2 years. For fiscal year 2022, FRA issued a notice of funding opportunity for this program, but failed to do so in 2023. Given the importance of this program for railroad safety, why did the FRA fail to release a notice of funding opportunity for FY23?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for that question. Implementing the bipartisan infrastructure law was a huge undertaking at FRA. We needed to have the resources in place to have a robust program. So that's one reason, but we look forward to the next round going out as soon as possible.
Do you anticipate a time? Can you?
We are going to have a calendar in the very near future in January of all of our grant programs for this year. So you will see that very soon.
All right. One of today's hearing's purposes is to discuss ways in which the federal government can better support grade crossing elimination and safety efforts. Can you explain how FRA has worked to make sure that the money is easily accessible?
Yes, sir. FRA has an Office of Regional Outreach and Project Delivery. We make sure that we go out into communities, into states, to make sure that they know that this funding is available. We know some smaller communities, smaller entities may have problems or may not have the technical expertise to apply. So we try to make sure they know what to do and provide them the resources to do so. And again, we just try to get the word out and also encourage them to work with the host railroads.
In your testimony, it says Texas, and I think we lead the way in many things, but we also lead the way as it relates to the number of block crossings. I think about 6,500 of them, about 21% of all the reported block crossings took place in Texas. What are we doing wrong? I think, Mr. Jeffries, you brought it up. What are we doing wrong here in the great state of Texas?
Well, Mr. Chairman, it's going to take a collective effort to improve on that in Texas. It involves FRA, it involves the railroads, it involves the communities, law enforcement, and others, first responders. In Texas, we try to take a can-do attitude and started in Houston, really rolling up our sleeves and tackling the situation there. We are also focusing on Texas in terms of auditing grade crossings there. So we have a whole program in places like Texas, also Washington State, and other places. So we will definitely do more.
The entire panel, what recommendations do you have for us to better improve the grade crossing elimination grant program, Ms. Hamady?
Well, one thing I would say, the program itself, funding is key. I think we have to remember that states are in need of funding, but also we can't forget the need to communicate with local communities. Mm-hmm. In Mendon, Missouri, 138 people is the population of Mendon, Missouri. When we arrived on scene, I went to find Farmer Mike, who was all over social media talking about the dangers of this crossing. This crossing was not identified as a high-risk crossing because there weren't incidents at it before. But it was well known by all the farmers of a dangerous crossing. Mm-hmm. I think we have to remember how important communication is.
I agree.
Because a lot of times they're not heard. They need to be heard. Yeah. Also, at some point, I'd love to talk about the years-long process and red tape that states and local communities experience when it comes to fixing some of these crossings.
Mr. Jeffries, is $600 million enough?
I think when it comes to grade separations, no amount of money is going to be enough.
Yeah.
The challenge is enormous. We're grateful and we're advocates for the program. I associate myself with the administrator's comments. I think making sure communities are aware of the opportunities out there and vice versa, and getting that money put to work quickly.
Yeah.
Put it to work quickly. It takes years, upwards of 10 years for reviews before dollars go to the ground.
Thank you, thank you. Ms. Hamady, I got a question about FAA. The FAA reauthorization expires here on March 8th. We did a good job in the House. It's over in the Senate. They're squabbling over there, this and that. We extended it till March 8th. How do you feel about that? And there shouldn't be any more extensions. Would you agree with me on that?
No extensions. There should not be any more extensions on FAA. They need long-term, robust funding, your support. We need an FAA reauthorization bill, which, by the way, your bill also reauthorizes the NTSB, so thank you for that.
Thank you, thank you. With that, I will now recognize Ranking Member Payne for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you for those poignant questions, very important. Chair Hamady, of the dozens and dozens of open recommendations the NTSB has regarding rail safety, has there been a common theme regarding worker fatigue and sickness?
We have seen worker fatigue in past investigations. We have called, for example, on FRA to implement a rulemaking on obstructive sleep apnea. It would be screening, diagnosis, and treatment for obstructive sleep apnea, which contributes significantly to fatigue and fatigued workers.
Okay. What are some of the recommendations the board has been to address these problems?
On fatigue?
Yes.
In addition to the screening for obstructive sleep apnea, we've also recommended that the railroads work with the labor unions to develop scientifically based, within the hours of service rules, scientifically based scheduling.
And what has the response been from the railroads?
It varies among the railroads, but I would be happy to get back to you on that. Some are still open.
Thank you. Mr. Jeffries, in March 2023, you authored a letter to Secretary Buttigieg stating the following: I'm writing on behalf of the freight rail industry to inform you that all 7 Class 1 railroads have agreed to join the FRA's voluntary confidential close call reporting system as requested in your February 27, 2023 letter to Class 1 CEOs. That did not indicate a negotiation that the statement said that all 7 Class 1 railroads agreed to join the C3RS program as it stands, full stop. It has been 10 and a half months since you sent that letter, and not even one of the Class 1 railroads have joined the program. What is the holdup?
Thank you for that question, Ranking Member Payne. And I can say that that commitment remains. The Class 1 stand by that commitment, and that's why I sent a follow-up letter in August reiterating that commitment to Secretary Buttigieg and making clear that railroads were ready to sign up that day for a program that allows for reporting of all unknown events and a frequency of reporting known events with immunity from any sort of discipline that is significantly more generous from that which exists in the FAA program, which I believe is considered the model program. At the same time, railroads do all have existing programs that allow employees to report concerns confidentially, and many have shifted away from a discipline-based approach paradigm to a coaching-based paradigm. So the commitment stands. We've had several meetings with the FRA and our union counterparts. Unfortunately, the January meeting I believe the FRA had to cancel, but we look forward to getting this across the finish line. And I know it's taken a long time, but the commitment still stands.
And I appreciate that, but we really need to see some movement. It's good to hear that everybody's ready and willing to go, but, if there's no implementation, then, the words just kind of fall on, deaf ears. Understood the answer to mean that the Class 1 railroads are reneging on the statement you made in your letter now that Norfolk Southern derailment in East Palestine is far enough in the rearview mirror. I'll yield back. Hopefully there might be an opportunity for a second round.
Okay, I would make clear we're absolutely not reneging on that commitment.
Okay, we shall see.
The gentleman yields. Just information for this committee, Ms. Hamady, I think you got a dead stop time at 12:15. Is that about right? Just let members know.
I think yes, we have a.
Fair enough,
Yeah.
just as though we're aware. Okay, I'll recognize Ranking Member of the full committee, Mr. Larson, for 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks to the panel. First, for the chair of the NTSB, do you have an update on the timeline? First off, I want to apologize to people of East Palestine for mispronouncing the town. First, sincerely want to apologize for that. And second, do you have an update for us on the timeline to complete the NTSB report for the derailment?
Yes, I anticipate that the board will be together to discuss the final investigative report late spring, early summer.
Okay, normally these reports take about a year, and that's going to be a little longer than a year.
They actually take 2 years, and it'll be a year and just a couple of months.
Okay, all right, thanks. That's important.
And may I just add?
Please.
This was a very complex investigation with a lot of complex information. Plus, we had a 2-day hearing in June, which revealed other information that we wanted to dig in on. So it does take some time to get to the right answers, just so that we get to the right solutions.
All right, thanks. There are dozens of outstanding rail safety recommendations that haven't been addressed or adequately acted upon. I don't want you to list all of them because you listed them in the hundreds, but are there some priorities for Congress when it comes to rail safety?
It is always hard for the NTSB to pick priorities because every investigation is critical and every one of our recommendations is critical, so it's tough for me to put one over the other. But an area that you could look into are our recommendations for emergency responders, ensuring that they have the information they need and appropriate training to respond to accidents and incidents. DOT 111 tank cars, phasing them out of high-hazard materials service, including flammable gases. A look at having a change in the regulation on how you define a high-hazardous flammable train. Safety management systems. The risk reduction program that the committee put together, and I'll be honest, I was on the committee at the time, is different than SMS in some of the other modes of transportation where aviation has been extremely successful. That might be something we want to look at as applying that SMS model from aviation to our railroads.
Thank you. Administrator Bose, can you, from an FRA perspective, can you describe your views on why it's difficult to get to this close call reporting requirement agreement actually implemented? And I'll ask Mr. Jeffries to respond to the same.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Ranking Member. C3RS is a voluntary program that enables railroads and their employees to improve the safety culture of their organizations through proactive identification of safety hazards before accidents occur. I know we have been engaged in talking with AAR, also with individual railroad companies. I'm confident we can have a breakthrough to have the first Class 1 railroad be a part of the program. We have over 30,000 railroad employees covered right now whether it's through short-line railroads, commuter railroads, or Amtrak. We just need Class 1 railroads to join an existing program, not to change the program completely, to bend to a new program. We have an existing program that's worked, that's been recognized by GAO. We hope and we encourage folks to join that.
Yeah, Mr. Jeffries, do you have a response to my question?
On C3RS?
Yes, that's right.
Well, again, the commitment's there. We want a program that works, that is pro-safety at the end of the day, and have laid out a number of options we think are objective improvements to the program, and those conversations continue.
It would, so just, I'm not trying to get into an argument trying to figure this out, because this happens in the airline industry, where they have a system like this. And it's probably not exactly the same one, but it is one. It's one system. It's not one for one set of railroads and another system for another set of railroads, or one set of airlines and one for another set of airlines. It's one system.
There are,
So what is wrong with that approach?
well, I think
from your
that
perspective?
you hit the nail on the head. What we're suggesting is something that's modeled precisely on the FAA program that includes unlimited use of unknown events and then allows for any risk of immunity for a known event once every 5 years. We've suggested once every 3 years, so it's even more lenient than the FAA program.
Yeah, well, I got some follow-up questions because it's still a matter of creating one system. So you're suggesting to create one system, but then make everyone else change to what you want, as opposed to Class 1s moving to new systems.
I would suggest those who are in the program have also suggested changes are necessary.
You're suggesting that, have they?
Yes.
It's probably their job to say that, not your job. It just is
Right, exactly. So I don't want to put words in other people's mouths.
No, that's Congress's job. Thanks so much. I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Babin for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. And thank you, witnesses, for being here. I represent the 36th district in the state of Texas. We have Port of Houston. We have more petrochemical refining facilities than just about anywhere else in the entire country. And we have to have trains and trucks that run on time to get our materials there. Because Port of Houston is the largest port for waterborne tonnage. Administrator Bowes, the first question for you, it seems like we should be able to inspect train brake systems with technology while a train is underway, is in motion, versus having to stop train traffic mid-journey, have someone walk around the train using only eye visual to find spot potential problems while slowing it down and overall freight supply chain problems resulting. Can you give me the anticipated timeline for FRA approval of a pending waiver expansion petition on the brake health effectiveness technology, which has already been reviewed by FRA's Safety Board?
Congressman, thank you for that question about the brake health effectiveness waiver that BNSF, number one, already has brake health effectiveness waiver. They're seeking to expand that area that waiver covers that they already have. That petition is pending right now at the Federal Railroad Administration. The waivers are discretionary at FRA. The railroad is asking to deviate from FRA safety regulations. We will review that in the due course under our safety regulations and make sure it meets the highest levels of safety. I will tell you also, Congressman, our innovation principles that we've laid out requested that anytime there's a technology request in the waiver process, that there is consultation with the workers that will use them and the workers on which that technology will rely.
Thank you. And also, Chairwoman Homendy, I know you answered some questions already about East Palestine, but I want to talk about grade crossings. What trendings, and you have mentioned some of them already, has the NTSB seen in transportation incidents and accidents at these grade crossings, And can you give me some of y'all's recommendations specific to those grade crossings? And how can states best prioritize resources to address the problem as well?
Yeah, some of the trends we've seen is, the need for grade separation at high-risk locations, improved signage and warning, support and work between the states and Operation Lifesaver, which is important. They do a lot to educate drivers to safely navigate grade crossings, so the support for them is critical. That actually comes from an NTSB recommendation. High-profile crossings to make sure that hump crossings, cars don't get stuck on the crossing, so that has to be addressed. And as far as local resources, it is critical, again, that there is communication between states and local communities. We cannot forget the input of local communities, because if we're only relying on data is key. But you also need to talk with the local communities, because you may not have had any sort of incidents in the past, but have a well-known problem. And making sure that local communities understand what resources are available and that there is assistance by all the players.
Okay, thank you. And then Administrator Bowes, one more question for you. The program one program that improves safety, modernizes rail network that you discussed, the program is CRISI. Is it CRISI? Is that the way you pronounce it? The Consolidated Rail Infrastructure and Safety Improvements Program to help short-line railroads repair and rehabilitate worn-out track and rail infrastructure, leading cause of derailments on short lines. But these grants go toward passenger rails, seems like more frequently, like the $200 million in CRISI funds that FRA awarded to the California High-Speed Rail Project last year. And I understand that in a few weeks, your agency will release the funding notice for the next tranche of funds, $2.4 billion, and many eligible railroads like short lines will have to compete for those funds. I'm very concerned that with that much funding available just a few months before an election, the administration may favor just a handful of glitzy passenger rail projects. Safety should absolutely come first. So can you please give your commitment that FRA will take the proper amount of time to fairly review the many competitive short line projects that will apply in the next CRISI funding cycle and not rush this money out the door to a handful of headline-grabbing passenger rail projects on the eve of our election?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. The Consolidated Railroad Infrastructure and Safety Improvements Program is an absolute cornerstone of FRA's funding programs. We know that the short line railroads benefit from that program. That's why in the last round of funding, we awarded over 50% of the funding to the short line railroads. And you absolutely have my commitment that we will give fair and due consideration to short line applications. I will just note, when you talked about passenger rail projects, the passenger rail projects that we selected, such as the Gulf Coast, you mentioned California, those actually are over shared railways, or they're separating freight from passenger rail. So there is a freight rail component to those projects. So I just want to note that, but I take your point, and we definitely want to use CRISI as much as possible, and we hope we can get even more funding from the authorized levels.
The gentleman's time has expired.
Sorry about that.
Thank you. I now recognize Mr. Moulton for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for holding this important hearing. I might be the only member of this committee who has worked for a Class I railroad. I worked for Burlington Northern Santa Fe back in college, back when it was called a railroad and not a stock ticker symbol, but I won't digress further into the implications of that aside. I keep in close touch with my connections in the industry. Now, Norfolk Southern's East Palestine derailment has thrown freight rail safety into the public eye in a way that it has rarely been seen before, but we can't lose the forest for the trees here. Railroads are still the safest form of transportation in the United States, and the vast majority of derailments happen in rail yards, not on main lines. In 2023, there were 22,543 hazardous material incidents on highways. 22,543 compared to 297 hazmat incidents on the railroads. Since 2012, there have been 0 railway deaths with hazardous materials, while there have been 82 fatalities from hazmat accidents on highways. I've been working across the aisle on rail safety measures, and like any regulations, our goal is to lower accidents while simultaneously encouraging transit by rail. Because if we were to do the opposite, if we were to clamp down so hard on railroads that we push a lot of traffic to trucks, safety will get worse. And that's something that everyone on this committee needs to understand. Now, precision scheduled railroading, or PSR, has come into the spotlight in recent years as well, because it's created trains that regularly exceed 2 or 3 miles in length, while just a decade ago it was standard industry practice not to exceed around 7,500 feet. The National Academy is conducting a study on long trains to be published later this year, but Mr. Bose, understanding that additional action might come out of this report, what is FRA doing in the meantime to focus on the safe operation of such long trains?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. First, I want to lead off with this fact that a lot of people ask me. There is no regulation on the length of trains in this country, period. So why is
Well, we might be changing that, so.
There's multiple reasons, Congressman, and I appreciate your question there. Believe it or not, until I came to the FRA was not collecting data on the length of trains. That should be just a common sense information gathering that FRA should have been doing for years. We've changed that. Also, we are going to gather more information about long trains on a broader basis. We're working cooperatively with the National Academy of Sciences on their study. We also have our own study that we're hoping to complete by springtime that's been underway for years that we're hoping to wrap up. But I am encouraged and would be willing to work with anyone in Congress who is looking at the issue in a thoughtful manner.
I'm also very interested in wayside detection. There's been a lot of talk about increasing the number of hotbox detectors or reducing the spacing of them as a result of the East Palestine disaster. But of course, this is a 1960s technology. Back in the 1960s, a lot of railroads were still communicating by telegraph. If one of the conclusions of the report on East Palestine is that we didn't have good communication with the local community, as some people have said, I don't think we'd be encouraging railroads to install more telegraphs, right? So what we really have here is actually an opportunity to look at the next generation of monitoring technologies. There's all sorts of interesting technologies out there: acoustic monitoring, fiber optic, LiDAR, and a lot of onboard sensing technologies. I mean, half of us are walking around with onboard sensing technologies on our wrists just to measure our health. It's not an unreasonable expectation to expect that we might have those kinds of monitoring systems on rail cars, which would not only be beneficial for safety, but would give real-time data to railroads and car owners, maintainers, and literally the engineers running the trains themselves. In fact, that's why several railroads have already started adopting some of this technology. So I think it would be a huge mistake, Mr. Chairman, for the Congress to come down and mandate that we double down on the 1960s technologies when there's much better technology out there that we might help push the industry towards. Mr. Jeffries, how are railroads starting to implement some of this next generation technology?
Well, Congressman, thank you for that question, and you hit the nail on the head, and one that is within our recommendations, because it's often been noted that there's not a federal nexus with wayside detection right now, and we want to make sure that any sort of federal action around wayside detection doesn't lock us into today's, or worse yet, yesterday's technology. We've got to have open-ended, innovative, supporting regulations, because you're right, the future is not hotbox detectors of yesterday or today. The future is not even acoustic bearing detectors, which are a great leap forward. The future is potentially onboard sensors, continuous sensing. The future is autonomous detection. And so we have to make sure collectively any sort of policy structured around this allows for that consistent innovation with an ever-improving safety outcome.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Rouser for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Administrator, I understand your agency may soon unveil a new rule requiring railroads to have 2 crew members operating a train. Is that true?
That's true.
even if they can safely operate the train with one person?
Congressman, it's a pending rulemaking right now. We've had a lot of comments, and we will address the point that you made.
Well, I just note that it'd be the first time in nearly 200-year history of railroading that the country, in the country where there's been a federal rule on the number of people needed to operate a train. If it goes forward, hundreds of small, short-line freight railroads will need to make artificial and inefficient economic and management decisions. They'll be forced to put their limited resources towards hiring people they don't need instead of capital improvements. And obviously, this is a particularly acute issue for your small, short-line rails. I want to also
Congressman?
underscore. Yes, sir. Were you going to say something? Yes.
I know the administrator's constrained with what he can say. I fortunately am not. I can say unequivocally, we don't believe there's any objective data to support this rule. There wasn't in 2016. The administration said as much then. There wasn't when it was withdrawn in 2019. There's not today. This is a political gift made on the campaign trail in 2020, and that's a fact, and we'll fight this rule hard.
Thank you for your comment there. I also want to underscore the point that my colleague, Mr. Babin, was stressing as it related to short rail. The Christie program is incredibly important, and to have those funds directed to my friend from California, Mr. LaMalfa's favorite project in California, which actually I've been out there to see. It looks more like a shelter for homeless than it does high-speed rail, quite honestly. Just absolute, complete disaster. It's important, very important for those Christie grants to go towards their intended purpose, not so much passenger rail that may or may not be in the best interest of the taxpayers of a particular state. I'll let Mr. LaMalfa comment more on that. Ms. Homendy, a question for you. The traffic incidents at rail crossings, is there a correlation with substance abuse there, increased substance abuse? And particularly, I'm kind of wondering if in those states that have legalized marijuana, have you seen an uptick in those type of issues there?
We have not tracked trends with respect to substance use and grade crossing collisions. However, we have investigated grade crossing collisions where there have been impaired individuals. Impairment is a big problem right now on our roads. We have over 10,000 people dying annually on our roads due just to alcohol impairment. When it comes to substance use beyond alcohol, frankly, we don't have a way to test people. And there are no standards among states or standardization on testing among states on that. So we are behind the curve on that, and it's a growing problem.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see if there's any studies. Anybody else have any comment on that, substance abuse as it relates to fatalities, injuries?
I can speak from it more broadly. We have federal drug rules that we follow closely, and drug regulations regarding substance use, because we're in an inherently risky industry. And I can just tell you from the employee standpoint, in those states where marijuana has been legalized, we wash out half of our potential employee base before we even get to day two when we talk about the fact that we rigorously drug test. And so Chair Homendy referenced the accidents involving being impaired, but as far as potential employee base, it's an issue. It's a real issue for us.
Yeah, it's a real issue across the board for every employer. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Carson for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm very concerned about the worsening problems of blocked rail crossings from longer and longer freight trains, especially in places like downtown Indy, where major intersections have been blocked literally for hours. This is a serious safety problem, blocking emergency vehicles, even endangering lives. And it also hurts our supply chains, quite frankly, especially trucks that get stuck at these block crossings. Beyond some of the new resources in the infrastructure bill, I think there needs to be more statutory authority to address this problem, like provisions passed by this committee in the INVEST Act, which is why, quite frankly, we're working on reintroducing the Block Rail Crossing Safety Improvement Act to codify the committee-passed provisions. I'm curious, do you all think that these kinds of statutory changes would improve safety and passenger rail services related to on-time performances? And secondly, what more can our committee do to address this issue with the kind of specificity necessary?
Congressman, thank you for that question. I know it had multiple parts, so if I don't answer every part, please bear with me. When you talked about blocked crossings specifically, I think that this is a good time to reflect on long trains and the size of trains that are growing and the amount of time that those trains occupy a grade crossing. That's one thing to keep in mind. Just as I said about regulation or a law about the train length, there is no law on the books about blocked crossings. So I would just say, please keep that in mind. When it comes to block crossings, we, in our safety advisory on train length, which we issued, brought up the fact that train length can affect crossings. So again, there's linkages between the two. Another linkage there is we've seen that when there's multiple crew members on a train and there's a block crossing, that having more than one crew member could be helpful in that situation to unblock that block crossing. So again, all these things can work together, Congressman, but block crossings is an issue that I hear from members all over the country about on a continuous basis, and members of this committee. Having said that, in terms of things that could be done, FRA will roll up our sleeves community by community using the tools that we have available, whether it's talking to the railroads directly in several cases, such as Hammond, Indiana. I talked to CEO Alan Shaw specifically and told him my expectations. Back then, UP CEO Jim Venna, I told him about my expectations about the east end of Houston and block crossings there. And it was CEO Lance Fritz. But I'm happy for FRA to play a role under our authorities right now, and we will work with Congress and with the railroads and communities to do what we can to not have block crossings.
Congressman,
Yes, sir.
you asked the panel. On train length, just to clarify, median train length in 2022 was about 5,200 feet long. 90% of trains were less than 7,500 feet long. And I think we need to also think about commodity mix. When we've seen the significant decline in coal traffic, which has significantly shorter cars, and increase in intermodal traffic, intermodal cars are significantly longer. So a 100-car intermodal train is going to be significantly longer than a 100-car coal train. And let's remember, intermodal trains are taking trucks off the highway themselves. All that being said, it does no one any good to have a train sitting still. It doesn't help our communities we operate in. It doesn't help our customers. So the goal is to have a safe, fluid network. And that's why we think it does take communities, it takes railroads, looking at myriad number of tools. The administrator, the FRA's played a positive role in this. He talked about a few examples where we've seen progress. And we've got to keep chipping away at these high-impact crossings and look for ways to improve that, because we need to be good public partners, and having a train stopping in the middle of a community, that's no way to achieve that.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Congressman, I looked at the data for Indiana. Last full year of reporting, up 49% in complaints for block crossings year over year. It is absolutely a problem. I think we understand and realize that, as has been mentioned, the safety benefit of getting as much freight onto the rail corridors is important, but we have to find common ground and try and solve this problem.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you all.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Lamar for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Jeffries, you had a statistic a while ago. Would you repeat that? I didn't quite catch it. It said something about 80% of crossings with devices had issues. Could you Do you recount that
In
statistic?
my opening, I believe it's 60% of, there's been a 60% increase in crossings with active devices since 2005.
So
I
what
need
you're
to fact check
saying is
myself,
that
but I
where you
believe-
have the arms and the lights and the whole works there, there's
Correct.
still an increase of people driving around them or running through them or what have you, and running into trains?
Unfortunately, yes, the vast majority of grade crossing incidents are due to risky driver behavior, trying to beat a train before it gets to a crossing.
Even with lights and arms, huh?
Even with lights and arms, there's some horrific footage out there, unfortunately.
Okay. So at what point do we talk about responsibility of drivers not closing more crossings or building more, split grade crossings? At what point do we talk about responsibility of drivers to not do stupid things? I mean, how much emphasis is there in driver training or, when you get a speeding ticket and you have to go do driver school, stuff like that, on talking about this subject? Because what I hear on this panel is like, well, the safest grade crossing is no grade crossing. Well, I represent a very rural area, and there's one hell of a lot of at-grade crossings that can't afford to be made into, as fellow in Indiana said, a $40 million overcrossing. And the $3 billion grant is being talked about here. If that was devoted all to $40 million overgrade crossings, we could build 75 in this country with that grant. I also note at the same time, there's been $3 billion more approved for California's high-speed rail boondoggle, a failed project, and another $3 billion for the Gambler Special from Las Vegas to Los Angeles. So I guess they're looking at these deals as important as this grade crossing concern. But that all said, for rural areas, and especially, example for the high-speed rail running through central California there, and cutting farmers and ranchers and people off where this rail has to be so dedicated, so fenced off. Now a farmer, pulling his tractor with a wide disc down a road or moving his combine or whatever, moving cattle, now has to go extra miles around to get to another crossing there because this has cut them off. And you're going to see many, many examples of that. So the Secretary's talking about, Farmer Mike saying, we don't like this crossing. Well, I know a lot of Farmer Bobs that are saying, if you take this crossing away from us, then I got to move my equipment and everything I do, all my harvested crop has to go extra miles around because you guys closed the crossing, all in the idea of everything being safety. Well, I guess we want the world a big plastic bubble, don't we? Because we have to, let's fill in all the swimming pools. Somebody might drown in. Let's just stay in bed. Don't get out. Go outside in the morning. We were looking at a proverb this morning that said, "Where no oxen are, the trough is clean." All right. But increase comes by the strength of an ox. So I guess that locomotive could be seen as the ox. The locomotive needs to move, but so does the trucker, so does the tractor, so does the farmer, and people just in small communities that can't rely on government grants coming from D.C. from yet another freaking big $1 trillion project coming out of D.C., Inflation Reduction Act, that's going to provide grant money for all this stuff. It is not going to happen with the amount of at-grade crossings you're talking about eliminating. Most of this panel has said, the less at-grade crossings, the better. Well, there's somewhat of a balance here. If you live in a city where there's a high-traffic road, City of Redding, I think, only has one of them in Northern California, and they have many others that are at-grade. You want to shut them all down? Want to paralyze a town in addition to these rural areas? So I don't hear a whole lot of balance in talking about who's fighting for. Are you listening in the communities for people that don't want their at-grade crossings taken out? Maybe they can be improved with the approach. Maybe they can improve with the bigger lights and bigger arms or things like that. Would Mr. Bose, would you touch on that, please?
Congressman, we care about rural areas in multiple ways. We want to work with places. Let me just give you an example. The Mendon tragedy that Chair Homendy talked about, that's in Missouri. It was in a rural area. It was a hump crossing. There was visibility obstacles in that investigation that they found. So there are mitigation and ways to improve that. I'm sorry?
Did it have gates and lights?
No. And can I just make one more point?
Sure.
At FRA, we also looked at driver manuals of all 50 states and whether they mention grade crossing safety or not. And there's a deficiency in the number of driver's manuals across the country and also commercial driver's licenses requirements.
I know you're out of time. Can I comment on this? This is a really important point. When we were in Mendon, Missouri, and I sat in a barn with the farmer who was out there, they are split by the rail. And in this situation, the farmers all knew that this was a dangerous crossing. It wasn't just a humped crossing, it's literally like this. And what would happen is they would have to stop at the stop sign that was down a hill. Try getting a combine up that or any dump truck. What would happen is, and the farmer would tell us, he would start approaching the crossing. Most people knew that you would have to just rev the engine and go through the stop sign and then get up the hill. And then, because of the angle of the crossing, he'd have to literally stand up in the combine to look to see if he could see the train because it was a passive crossing, and then get across it. Closing crossings is not the only solution. There are so many other things we can do. In this one, change the design or the profile of the crossing to allow others to cross it safely, not putting them in such a dangerous position. So there are lots of great things we can do to improve grade crossing safety in your rural communities.
Well, as long as you're not taking it away, I would love to see, I have one like that in Yuba County. You can do a great Dukes of Hazzard over that baby if you want to. So the approach could be made, but still keep the crossing. And if that's what you're talking about, then I can get behind more of that. But if I hear a whole lot of blanket, close down the crossings, yeah, crossings is not being blocked if it doesn't exist anymore. So this will really mess up rural America if what I hear on this panel is so much more enthusiasm for closing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, and I know you just yielded, but that's why I think it is very important that the states and the federal governments sit down with local communities to understand what they need.
Thank you. Thank you. I now recognize Ms. Foshee for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses for being here this morning. It's been almost a whole year since the Norfolk Southern train derailment in East Palestine, Ohio, and I'm glad to finally have the opportunity to address rail safety concerns. My home state of North Carolina is no stranger to train derailments and crashes, averaging about 32 annually, including one that happened in my district just last week. Thankfully, everyone walked away safely. This is why I am thankful for the Biden administration and the bipartisan infrastructure law that made historic investments in rail safety, investing nearly $3 billion to reduce grade crossing incidents. My questions today are for Chair Hamady. In the investigation into the Norfolk Southern derailment in East Palestine, the NTSB found that 23% of the cars that did not derail had reportable defects. Are freight railroads knowingly dispatching trains that have defects, or do the yard workers not have enough time to perform full inspections?
This is something we're looking at as part of our investigation, but what I will say is I don't believe freight railroads are knowingly releasing trains or putting together trains that are in violation of federal regulations.
Thank you for that. That's good to hear. Despite the Association of American Railroads' recommendation that trains stop when a trackside detector determines a wheel is 95 degrees above ambient temperature, Norfolk Southern's policy was not to do so until the temperature exceeded 115 degrees above ambient. Are there any federal requirements that govern wheel monitoring while the train is en route?
Congresswoman, there are none. And I want to point out a couple of things, though. The operating rules of the particular railroad do apply, and if those are violated, FRA can take enforcement action. I don't want to talk about an ongoing investigation at FRA, but that is a possibility. What you also point out in terms of new technology, which we encourage, what you point out is a good point also. It's not just about having the technology, it's about what they measure and whether actions are taken based on the information. We also know that when it came to the detectors, that Norfolk Southern had one person monitoring their system when it came to hot bearing detectors. Again, it's great to have the technology, but do they also have people to implement it and act on it when deficiencies are found?
Do each of the railroads have their own policies on what temperature above ambient that the wheel needs to be before advising to stop a train and inspect?
I welcome others to weigh in here, but they do. Now, some of them are consistent, but some of them have differing. We do not regulate that.
Congresswoman,
Hamady, would you, Mr. Jeffries? That's
I can tell you the industry has adopted standards, as you referenced, and over this year has adopted a new absolute temperature threshold for when to pull a train out of service, moving from 200 down to 170 degrees as of July 1. We've also analyzed over 150 different trending algorithms to establish a new trending rule for when to pull out of service as well. My point being that as we learn from incidents when they occur, we're taking action to reduce the likelihood of an incident occurring again, and we're not resting on our laurels. We'll continue to take those steps as we learn more.
And to add to that, Congressman, that's absolutely true. There are corrective actions already in place or underway. The things that I was mentioning were the situation at the time that have come to light.
And if you don't mind me adding, that's the advantage of the NTSB process. We bring the regulator and the railroad and the unions into our investigation so that they're finding out in real time what we're finding out from the evidence so that they can take action. We don't have to wait for a rulemaking. AAR was able to adopt standards very quickly, and I think that's a success when they're able to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back the balance.
The gentlelady yields. I now recognize Mr. Westerman for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you to the witnesses for being here today. And I want to go back to a question that Dr. Babin brought up and maybe, or hopefully get a little bit more explanation on that, talking about brake health effectiveness. And my understanding is that it's 10 times more effective than a walking visual inspection at an intermediate stop to find brake defects on a train. And I also understand that the unions and the rail management are jointly supportive of a waiver for that. So, Mr. Bose, can you tell me why this issue has been pending for so long? What's the holdup on getting this waiver approved?
Congressman, I'll just repeat myself a little bit of what I said earlier. There are brake health effectiveness waivers already in effect, so they're in use. There is a request to expand the area of the waiver. It is pending. I will say that there were multiple comments. It wasn't just one comment, or there were a few comments, so FRA will review that. Now, I can't get into this because I will be the appealing official if that waiver is hypothetically approved and challenged, so, or is not approved and challenged. So I have to just be a little cautious in how much I get into it. At FRA, we believe strongly in technology and visual inspections working together. We endorse that. It should not be one at the expense of another.
Congressman, could I provide a little context on that as well?
And I was going to come to you next, Mr.
Oh, well.
So, go right ahead.
So we're actually, we think this is a win-win for everybody. You're using wayside technology to dramatically increase the effectiveness of brake health inspections, and working with the Brotherhood of Railway Carmen, who are the affected union who typically does those manual inspections. We've developed data that demonstrates that using technology identifies significantly more defects, and thus it allows technology to do what it does best, which is detect potential flaws in the system, and then allows our employees to do what they do best, which is fix those flaws. And so they get to focus on their areas of expertise. Technology does what it does best, and that's why the BRC both last year and just last week, wrote in support of this waiver request. We're hopeful that the administration approves it. As Mr. Bose said, there's a similar existing waiver, and the data, speaks for itself on that. This would expand that, and it's models like these. We get it. We need to get union buy-in. The administration's been very clear, and successfully doing that in this case, we think, is a model for how we can all work together to advance technology and, more importantly, advance safety.
And when it comes to safety, I think that should be the top priority, and if people want to buy into safety, that's a good thing too, but at the end of the day, you've got to look at the data and the technology and go with safety over other things. But in this particular instance, it appears that if you're detecting early detection of a potential brake failure, actually provides more labor to go in and fix the problem before it turns into a problem, or fix the issue before it turns into a problem. So I don't see where it would hurt people's employment to be able to detect this, and plus you get the absolutely best benefit of having safer trains.
We're very hopeful that this is allowed to proceed in the manner requested, and in its letter last week, the union also suggested it might be a way to increase fluidity at the border to allow technology to do required brake inspections at the border as well, so trains aren't sitting idling for extended periods of time. They can move through, be autonomously inspected, and then the work can be done in the yard. So it's opportunities like this. They abound in the industry, and we want to take advantage of them wherever we can because the safety case is strong.
And there's a lot of other benefits of technology that it looks like the railroad industry is catching up with a lot of manufacturing by implementing this continuous improvement technology and monitoring, which not much time, Mr. Jeffries, but I know the administration is pushing for autonomous vehicles, yet they maintain you need 2 people to operate a train, which is operating on its a secure right-of-way. You want to talk about that?
The irony is not lost on us in the least there. We actually think we should be the test bed for autonomous innovation, given we operate in a largely closed network on a fixed guideway. Crew staffing has always been an issue for unions and railroads in collective bargaining. That's where it should stay. We don't believe there's any objective data that supports a mandate in perpetuity for where individuals should be located, and think it should be left for unions and their employees to determine. Because we have heard loud and clear from our unions that quality of life and work-life balance are one of their #1 priorities. And so if there are ways we can help address that by making sure people work more regular shifts, go sleep in their own bed every night while maximizing safety, we should absolutely take advantage of those opportunities. And so this would stifle the ability to continue to work towards that goal.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman's time spent. Thank you. Ms. Napolitano, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Administrator Bose, Chairwoman Homendi, and Mr. Jeffries, it's good to see you again. Thank you for providing your expertise to the committee. You're all aware of my strong advocacy for grade crossing safety and grade separation projects based on my needs. My district has added grade crossing safety improvements to 55 crossings. We have separated 30 crossings on the Alameda Corridor East and surrounding rail lines. We did much of the work prior to the increase in the federal investment in grade crossing safety, including the FAST Act and the BIL. Funding grade crossing is important, but I have personal experience knowing that just as important is effective coordination between government agencies, building the project, and the private railroads where they exist. Too many times, fully funded projects have been delayed by railroads not providing logistical, engineering, and staff support in a timely manner. We have had times where federal and state grants were about to lapse because of railroad delays in approving engineering plans. Administrator Bose is very familiar with one of my projects in Pomona that built an adjacent rail line in order to close 2 heavily trafficked crossings, but the new rail line was delayed becoming operational for 2 years due to disagreement between railroad and pipeline companies. Mr. Bose, Mr. Jefferson, and Mr. Smith, how are the railroad, and briefly please, how are the railroad companies, the FRA, state transportation agencies, and the local authorities working together to make sure these projects are built quickly and efficiently without bureaucratic or corporate delays? Have you better coordination between transportation agencies and railroads on grade crossing projects? And what more can be done to expedite the implementation? And Chairwoman Helmany, I would appreciate any comments you have on the concern. Also, I have another question besides for you. What are the effects of the current CR on NTSB, and what would be the impacts of a long-term CRB?
Congresswoman, I'll take the first one about the grant program. And first of all, thank you for your support of the bipartisan infrastructure law and Congress establishing a permanent, long-standing, consistently funded program is a very important step in that planning process that you're talking about so that host railroads, communities, state governments, local governments can talk to each other and they know that the funding is in place and it won't go away a year from now. Having that 5 years of funding is great. If we can continue that, I think that that would create a pipeline of projects because we know it does take a long time to do that. On FRA's end, we will look to ways to streamline the process. We know that communities definitely deserve a say in the environmental process, but we can also look for ways to expedite that.
Congresswoman, just to jump on that, and I agree with everything the administrator said. I know everybody. Don't be too surprised. This is an area where we absolutely fully support the program, and thank you for your leadership. I would venture that you probably know more about the challenges of block crossings and grade crossings than anyone on this committee. You've been a champion for addressing that for a long time. Community engagement is key, as the administrator said.
I have a second part of the question, remember, and she has 2 minutes.
I got you.
Okay.
Okay. Community engagement is key. Getting the money to work quickly is key. And look forward to working with you to make sure this program stays around for a long time.
Great, thank you.
The NTSB has 437 employees. Our budget is $129.3 million from last year, which is carried over with CR. I begged for 145 in the president's budget, and this committee authorized that for us. I'm extremely grateful. But when it comes to a year-long continuing resolution, what is happening for the NTSB means a hiring freeze, which means the professionals aren't out there doing the safety work that you all need. 2, it's a freeze on training. Equipment that's reaching the end of their useful life cannot be replaced when it's too expensive. IT improvements that we desperately need to conduct get extended indefinitely. And that backlog, we had a backlog when I came in as chair. Almost 500 reports were 2, 3, 4 years old. That's not acceptable. Today, it's 0, but that takes resources to get there. That means we have to make sure that our investigators have the tools they need to succeed. A year-long CR won't do it for us. We need help. And here's why, and what agencies are not talking about. We have now a well-deserved 5.2% pay raise for our employees that just kicked in, plus a 5% increase in benefits. That means we're essentially not living off of the funding that we had last year. It's a cut. So we are raising the red flag, saying we have an important safety mission for this nation, and we need your help to make sure we have the resources to succeed.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to address the length of the trains and the number of people. If you have a mile-long train and only one operator, it would take him half an hour to go to the back of the train to find out what's wrong. So I strongly advocate making sure that we have enough personnel to deal with problems.
Gentlelady's time has expired. I now recognize Mr. Stauber.
Thank you very much. And to the witnesses, thank you for coming here today and sharing your expertise. One of the things, and I may have missed it, but one of the things that I think we all also have to look at when we talk about railroad and rail crossing safety is you're going through rural communities, and I represent northern Minnesota. Rural, we've got a couple of class 1s coming through the district that I represent. I would really appreciate more of an emphasis on training our local firefighters and law enforcement. So I think that, you know, when an incident does happen, that they're trained, they understand, they know who to call, and you know, we go through reservation territory, you go through state land, federal land, you go through these communities, and I know that we're we're not necessarily talking about that today, but I would really implore you all to make sure that many of these are volunteer firefighters that are volunteering their time, and I think that's really important. So I just encourage you, don't forget our rural communities and the safety for those law enforcement, those sheriffs, local police officers, and our first responders, because it's really important. I think that it should be a high priority. I hope it is, but that's just, I didn't hear it mentioned today, and I just want to make sure that as a former law enforcement officer, it's really important. And I will just tell you, as a county commissioner in St. Louis County, we did very good with our rail carriers as far as safety. It was a good relationship, and I hope that we have those continued relationships across the country, because the supply chain needs you. So I just want to, Administrator Bose, this month the new state emissions rule goes into effect in California that requires railroads to phase out older locomotives and convert them to newer locomotives over the next few years, and to begin funding an account based on their emissions. The new rule is so aggressive, the agency in charge, the California Air Resources Board, or CARB, admits some short lines would be eliminated due to the cost of the proposed regulation. In the coming weeks or months, the EPA could give its blessing to the California rule, and many states could soon choose to mimic California's misguided measures. Are you concerned about the impact the CARB rule could have on short-line freight industry?
Congressman, the California Air Resources Board is going through its process. The short line railroads have had a chance to comment on it. There's litigation on it. As you know, I don't think it's appropriate for me to comment on that, especially because it's the EPA. Can I just address your rural communities point?
Sure,
Just
sure,
one,
quickly, yep.
very quickly. The Pipelines Hazardous Materials Safety Administration has a program called the Assistance for Local Emergency Response Training, and I would just encourage Congress to continue that program. And I take your point with rural communities. I witnessed that myself when I went to Montana. In Joplin, Montana, there was an Amtrak derailment there. But with CARB and with the short line railroads, I take your point there. The short line railroads also have the Small Business Administration. They have an advocate there that can advocate on their behalf.
Mr. Jeffries.
On your training point, totally agree. 35,000 first responders trained in the field in 2023. It's a never-ending mission, so we're with you on that. On CARB, we think, one, CARB has moved forward. There's a rule in place. There's a regulation in place. They've now gone to the EPA for a waiver. We believe a waiver would be unlawful. The Clean Water Act says states cannot regulate new or remanufactured locomotives. That's exactly what this would do. 25% of short lines put out of business. That's traffic going right back on the highways.
And what would that do to supply chains?
It would snarl it up. And you know, we don't operate in a closed network in just California. We operate in a national integrated network, and we believe there are other laws at play there that make it illegal.
Mr. Bose, I want to talk about Creasy real quick. We got 30 seconds. You know, these grants help railroads repair and rehabilitate worn-out track and rail infrastructure, which is the leading cause of derailments. Sometimes these grants are given to passenger rail, like the $200 million Creasy grant from the FRA awarded to the California High-Speed Rail Project. Can you commit that the FRA will take the proper amount of time to fairly review the many competitive projects that will apply in the next Creasy funding cycle, and not just rush the money to the handful of headline-grabbing passenger rail projects?
Congressman, to answer your question, yes. I do want to just make one clarification on that California project. That went to eliminate grade crossings and separate the California High-Speed Rail Project from BNSF freight railroad tracks.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Johnson for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing, and thank you to the witnesses for your time and for your testimony. After Congress passed the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, President Biden and his administration have taken steps to make American rail safer, more reliable, and more resilient, delivering tangible benefits to dozens of communities where railroads are located, and strengthening supply chains for the entire country. Additionally, the administration supports fair compensation for rail workers, ensuring they receive competitive wages and benefits commensurate with their vital role in the transportation sector. In short, the administration continues to put people over politics. The IIJA doesn't just benefit Democrats, it helps all Americans, which is why you see my colleagues on the other side who did not vote for the IIJA at home bragging about the great resources that they have brought back to their districts under that law. As we talk about rail today, we must remember that rail travel is the cornerstone of American transportation, a symbol of progress and a conduit for connecting communities and fueling economic growth. Its true potential can only be realized when robust safety measures are in place, safeguarding every journey and every individual involved in this vast network. The safety of our nation's rail system, both for the countless passengers who rely on it daily and the dedicated workers who operate and maintain it, must be at the forefront of our discussions. Mr. Bose, Atlanta was originally named Terminus, and it was founded as a railroad terminus. And it has many dangerous grade crossings that risk safety of the public. Under the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the Federal Railroad Administration awards grants to local governments to eliminate these safety risks. Two counties in metro Atlanta, DeKalb County, which I represent, and also Gwinnett County, which I'll be representing after this next election. Those counties received funding last year under the initial round, and many other counties in Georgia are eager to follow their path, particularly for crossings in disadvantaged communities. However, the notice of funding opportunity has not been issued or even scheduled yet for fiscal year 2023. When does the FRA plan to issue the NOFO for the Railroad Crossing Elimination Grant Program for fiscal year 23?
Congressman, thank you for the question. We are going to issue that as quickly as we can. And since you brought up DeKalb County and Gwinnett County, I did want to let you know I had an opportunity to visit Lilburn, and Congresswoman McBath was there. We talked about grade crossings in Gwinnett County, and I understand the importance of that. I also happen to have grown up in DeKalb County, and I know you're a county commissioner there when I lived there when I was older. But Georgia and Atlanta can serve a lot of different purposes, from freight rail to also passenger rail. We just awarded a corridor ID grant to study routes and also to do more between Atlanta and Savannah, Atlanta, Charlotte, Atlanta, and Nashville. So again, we're hoping for cooperation between the host railroads, the state, and also local governments there. But grade crossings are absolutely an opportunity to make improvements on. And again, thanks to your support of the bipartisan infrastructure law, we have a program, and I'm convinced the Georgia Department of Transportation, along with their local partners, will see and utilize that program more than just their FHWA Section 130 program.
Thank you. How can communities best position themselves to proceed or to succeed in obtaining a grant?
That's a very good question, Congressman. First of all, having local funding in place that they can use for that 20% match helps. It also helps, again, to have an agreement with the railroad over which the grade crossing will be. Working with a state agency or a local or city Department of Transportation is also helpful. And again, our FRA can work with your office to get the word out to your communities.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a letter from Chuck Baker, President of the American Short Line and Regional Railroad Association, dated January 18th of 2024, without objection, so ordered. I now recognize Mr. Burleson for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bose, it seems like it's a good idea to be able to inspect the train brake system with technology while the trains are moving and in motion versus having to stop trains mid-journey and have someone walk around the train using their human eye to spot potential problems. And all the while slowing down what I think is, we all understand, is a critical supply chain. And I understand that the rail management and labor are both jointly supportive of a waiver petition that has been pending for quite some time at the FRA to expand the use of this proven technology that's known as brake health effectiveness. Can you give me an anticipated timeline for the FRA's approval of this pending waiver expansion petition, which we understand has already been reviewed by the FRA's Safety Board?
Congressman, we received that application in June of 2023. That application, that petition, is still under review at the Federal Railroad Administration. And I want to be clear on this because I don't want to leave any misperceptions here. Brake health effectiveness technology is utilized right now. It can continue to be utilized right now. I encourage it to be utilized right now. I don't want to disrespect the people who are working on the railroads, the railroad workers who do their duties every day, day in and day out, through COVID, in bad weather conditions. They have a skill set, Congressman, that I don't think any of us in this room have, and I don't want to disrespect their role in railroad safety.
As I understand from the data that's been collected, the use of the brake health effectiveness is over 10 times more effective than the walking visual inspection.
Congressman, that data, I'm happy to review it. We have the Railroad Safety Advisory Committee, where we can bring labor, railroads, FRA together, as well as the industry that makes that technology. And again, this is an opportunity with the Rail Safety Act. Congress can legislate. If it believes in this technology and endorses it, you can regulate it.
Okay. My next question has to do with illegal immigration. The whole world knows that it's become a bad problem. It's impacted a lot of things, but it's also impacted our supply chain. There have been major rail lines that have had to shut down twice because of the influx of illegal immigration. And sadly, this administration, the Biden administration, has done nothing to prevent this from occurring. And unfortunately, I don't think Americans are pleased. We've had enough transportation issues in this country, and we sure as heck do not need to force the shutdown of other transportation lines because of the president's unwillingness to do something about the influx of illegal immigration. So my question to you is, was your department aware of this issue before the closure of these rail lines?
Aware of what issue?
Of the impact the illegal migrants had on our rail lines that were coming.
Congressman, when it comes to rail security, that's a matter for each individual railroad to address. The Customs and Border Protection Agency is in charge of handling things at the border. FRA regulates the safety of the train.
But certainly your administration is working in coordination with the Department of Homeland Security regarding these issues.
The Customs and Border Protection Agency, when they issued that closure or those closures, made a determination on their own in the best manner that they saw fit.
And there was no communication between your agency and CBP?
Congressman, I can't equivocally say there wasn't communication. I can tell you when I saw it happen or heard about it happening, that was the first time I saw it.
Any steps that you've taken to make sure that it's not happening again?
Congressman, we stand ready to work with the Customs and Border Protection Agency as necessary and with the railroad companies at necessary to assist.
It's sad that we have to address that within the transportation industry. Thank you. I yield back the rest of my time.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Garcia for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, and of course to all of the witnesses. As everyone knows, Chicago is the nation's rail capital. With over 7,400 miles of railroad tracks and thousands of rail crossings, we're quite familiar with rail and the benefits and challenges that come with it. Illinois has the third most block crossings report. One of the dangerous effects of these blockings is that pedestrians, including kids on their way to school, can't safely cross the tracks at times in a timely manner. So some school kids in my district are ducking under massive freight trains, hoping that the trains don't start moving. The Grand Avenue grade crossing in the village of Elmwood Park, bordering my district, is a significant safety concern. The crossing has more than 120 trains and 25,000 vehicle crossings every day. It is 360 feet wide, the longest crossing in the state of Illinois, and is blocked for 20 minutes each hour during morning and evening travel. Elmwood Park is seeking federal support to construct a grade separation through the IIJA discretionary grants. Administrator Bose, what has the FRA assessed why railroads in Illinois seem particularly prone to blocking the crossings?
Congressman, thank you for that question. First on Elmwood Park, I've heard from the mayor directly. I've also heard from Ranking Member Quigley's office about Elmwood Park and the situation there. There's no doubt that Illinois, Chicago specifically, is the center of the country's rail network historically and for a number of reasons. And so many railroads operate through there, as well as all the major Class I railroads. So Chicago just happens to be the epicenter. That's why it's so useful that it has the CREATE program, a program that the federal government has given plenty of funding to, and we know that that is an ongoing effort, and we look forward to funding more projects through that, which is such a great collaboration between the railroads, between Metra, Amtrak, as well as FRA and the Federal Highway Administration.
Thank you for that. And will you commit the utmost attention and consideration of grant applications like this that will prevent tragedies?
Yes, sir. Safety is our guiding principle in the Railroad Crossing Elimination Program, as well as the Consolidated Railroad Infrastructure and Safety Improvements Program.
Thank you, Administrator. I look forward to working with you on this issue. To Chair Homendy, what can Congress do to better support rail workers and improve safety?
Implement our NTSB recommendations. We have 190 open rail safety recommendations, many of which address rail worker safety. Implement them. I know this committee has implemented many of our recommendations in legislation. Look forward to working with you again.
Great, thank you. And finally, Mr. Jeffries, your testimony includes a statistic that grade crossing collisions in 22 were down 37% from 2000, but recent NTSB data shows an increase in collisions over the past decade. Does this indicate that while collision rates have improved compared to 22 years ago, they have worsened within the past decade?
Well, I think we can say without a doubt that grade crossing safety is the largest challenge we face when it comes to public facing and public casualties. And so we should be working collectively, which I think we are, looking at every avenue possible to reduce, one, likelihood of impact, but two, to make crossings as safe as they can. And that includes public awareness as well, making sure the public knows the dangers of trying to beat a train, for example. And CREATE is a key portion of that, separating grades in Chicagoland. Thank you for your long-term support there, but this is not an issue we're going to solve overnight. We've got to make continuous progress.
But I would also add to that this is why the NTSB has long recommended connected vehicle technology, so that drivers are aware of when there is an active crossing. That is one technology. Also, just in motor vehicles themselves, we talked about impairment earlier with respect to grade crossings. The automakers are currently implementing driver monitoring technologies that would help prevent impaired driving and fatigue. So these are all technologies that could also address safety where our rails and our roads meet.
Thank you both. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Yakum for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of our witnesses for being here today. I'm especially happy to see my fellow Hoosier on the panel today, Indiana Department of Transportation Commissioner Smith. Welcome. Commissioner Smith, you were invited to testify because Indiana is a leader in railroad crossing elimination through its innovative Local Tracks Rail Overpass program. Most of us probably know railroad crossings as a headache on the drive to work or across town. Too many of us know a site where a loved one or a friend has perished. But as you point out in your testimony, Commissioner Smith, Indiana alone has 7,500 highway grade crossings. While you can't eliminate them all, you do focus on crossings that cause the greatest disruptions to quality of life and commerce or present the greatest safety risk. As a representative of Northern Indiana, I've seen firsthand the benefits that these projects can have in our own communities. Commissioner Smith, can you please talk about what you hear from communities that have been awarded local tracks funds?
Yeah, I think this is everything to our local communities in terms of their economic vitality, but most often just safety and mobility for their citizens. And so we have a community back home, community crossings that we talk about a lot, where locals get to pick and get support with just basic maintenance of their roadways. We view this as that type of essential program in terms of local tracks. And so these, in a lot of cases, are investments that they could never make on their own. And we value the part where we talk about not only state and local investment, but investment of the rail companies as well. So really adapting and accomplishing something that we couldn't, or local communities couldn't on their own.
Congressman, can I just jump in? I really want to commend Indiana DOT and the commissioner for his approach on this. And I just want to note also for the panel, states like Missouri, states like Ohio have really stepped up their game when it comes to state funding for grade crossing safety, things that we hadn't seen before. I'm convinced that those states saw the railroad crossing elimination program and saw it as an opportunity and as a way to utilize federal and state funding together. I just want to make that point.
Thank you, Administrator. And Commissioner Smith, what do you think are some of the biggest keys to success to the local tracks program and some of the biggest drivers of the inputs of success that you see from our local communities?
Well, I think we were very intentional, as Ms. Hamady discussed earlier, getting local input. And so this wasn't the state coming to local communities or stakeholders and identifying a problem, but allowing them to scope and tell us and drive the process themselves. And so I think that is one of the best parts of the program. I think in terms of just the time it has taken us to administer the program, I mean, there's a reason why we dedicated state funds to try and get these out the door. And really, we missed an opportunity with the massive inflation that we've seen over the last couple of years. And so we've got to do our best to continue to remove those types of roadblocks from our local communities.
And Chair Hamady, briefly.
Congressman, I would just add, it's not just resources, it's not just local input. It takes years to get these projects completed. We have to figure out a way to streamline these projects. Years. Meanwhile, the local community is continually stating, we need to address this. This is a safety problem.
Thank you. And Chairman, Commissioner Smith, is there anything else you'd like to add about this program or even more broadly about the interaction that the Indiana Department of Transportation has with our federal government?
Yeah, to build on Ms. Hamdi's point, I think we would say that we've seen a great amount of success getting grant agreements and discretionary funding underway with our federal highway partners. And no disrespect to other agencies, I think the Federal Highway Administration has a lot more boots on the ground and expertise in delivering the volume of grants that we're talking about with the bipartisan infrastructure law. I would ask that we lean on the successes we have seen in the Federal Highway Administration. And also, we're asking local communities to do some things that are outside of their expertise. So really trying to give them the resources technically to deliver some of the priorities that they're trying to deliver is a real gap out there as well.
Respectfully, Congressman, if I can just address that, I endorse all the efforts at the Federal Highway Administration. If the Federal Railroad Administration had decades of trust fund funding for our programs on a continuous basis, I'm confident that FRA would not be in the position that we're in, but we're making the best use of our resources. Again, we have a lot of learning to do, and we're willing to do that, and we want to work cooperatively with states.
Commissioner Smith, thank you for being here today. Thank you for bringing your Hoosier common sense to the nation's capital. Mr. Chairman, thank you for holding this hearing, and with that, I yield back.
I now recognize Mr. DeSaulnier for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to all the witnesses. Madam Chair, I understand you have to leave, so I'm glad I have a moment. You seem to be everywhere, by the way, recently.
Listen, I'm here as long as you all have questions, whatever you need.
Spoken like a former staffer of this committee. I have a district, as you may remember, that is a suburban urban district in the East Bay of the Bay Area. We have one of the highest concentrations per capita in geography density of hazardous materials sites because of 5 refineries and multiple chemical plants. The combination of the local hazardous materials team at the county health department, the regional air quality folks in Cal OSHA has really established a good practice. On the other side, on the commuter rail, we just recently had a derailment by the Bay Area Rapid Transit System. So my question is to safety culture. You've had a lot of experience of this lately in a world that's changing. So on BART's problem, they were changing some of the technology, but their revenue source is way down because people are staying home. The revenue from Fairbox recovery has gone down because of COVID. So the world changed, but keeping that safety culture, both in their capital improvements, as you say, that take a long time and are still adaptable. On the refinery and the energy side, I'm hearing a lot of stuff where there's a lot of stress because that business is changing, and the return on investment, particularly the modeling on return on investment and safety culture, my sense is changing. So how do we maintain, as you go out there, not only deploying your recommendations, but getting upstream? The BART situation reminded me eerily of when you were committee chair, when we had the problems with WMATA and loss of life at the Linfont station. So the question is, in a changing environment, both on the industrial side and on commuter rail, how do we keep these best practices when it comes to safety culture, whether it's capital improvements or operations?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I know the FRA has done some recent work on railroad safety culture. We're also doing an investigation on Norfolk Southern's railroad safety culture, largely as a result of the just sheer number of accidents that occurred within a short amount of time involving Norfolk Southern. And so that is underway. They've actually they've welcomed us on property. They've been working very cooperatively. So we're thankful for that, and also working with the unions as well. But we did a safety culture review of Metro North not too long ago, where they had 5 deadly accidents between 2013 and 2014. And we realized that really what all the workers were hearing was on-time performance, while the leadership thought that they were saying safety. And so there was a real disconnect there. You know, safety culture is key. I have to say, I really do believe our aviation system is a model for others when it comes to safety culture. When something happens, nobody is pointing fingers at each other. Everybody is getting together to figure out how we can figure out what happened and determine how to prevent it from happening again. And that is something that it's a really unique culture from aviation. And I would just advise some of the other industries to really sit down and learn from that culture. But it is something that we're all struggling with, whether it's, you know, NTSB, just workplace culture after COVID. It's all a very different environment.
Chair Hamidi and Congressman, if I can jump in here. In terms of the Federal Aviation Administration and aviation safety, FRA, we're not closed-minded. We can learn from them. We have worked with them in the past. We've invited them to events like we do called Rail Share, where railroad companies, railroad labor, the industry can come together and talk in an open forum. The safety culture assessment is something very important at FRA. We're doing it for all the Class 1 railroad companies. We did an audit of Amtrak as well recently that Congress required us to do. Also, we did a high-hazard flammable train route assessment. So at FRA, we're not just resting. We're constantly moving and looking at ways to move the needle on overall railroad safety.
I think this conversation about best practices and safety culture is really important. The Department of Energy has done so much on nuclear safety. Michael Lewis wrote his great book about the fifth element. We can borrow these human factors, in particular, across different, whether it's aviation, rail, energy, and hopefully we're doing that at the federal level because we should be. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize Mr. Keene for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for convening this important hearing. I'd also like to thank the witnesses for being here today. Before I get into my questions, I want to note for Administrator Bose the letter I sent to the FRA on December 20th of last year. This letter regarding the designation, or I should say the re-designation of a quiet zone for the Township of Branchburg, New Jersey, in my district. The Township has shown their commitment through funding and entering into necessary agreements with Norfolk Southern and other pertinent partners. I sent the letter to your Associate Administrator for Railroad Safety and Chief Safety Officer. I will make you and your team make sure that you and your team receive a copy of this letter before you leave here today. But in the meantime, can I get your commitment to work with my office in Branchburg on this effort?
Absolutely, Congressman.
Thank you. And Administrator Bose, do you think that grade crossing safety is ripe for innovation?
For innovation?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
And what specific steps have you taken since you were confirmed to encourage and advance innovation to grade crossing safety?
We have worked with the railroad companies, and we have also have research projects that are underway right now. I mentioned that vehicle-to-grade crossing technology communication that we have. We're open to all other types of initiatives. And also, if Congress has any ideas or any things that FRA should look at, we're happy to do that.
Thank you. Mr. Jeffries, you mentioned in your testimony, most grade crossing and rail-related pedestrian accidents are preventable and can best be reduced through education, engineering, and enforcement. I want to focus on the education front. What has the FRA or your association done to educate the public to prevent these possible deaths or injuries?
We all work collectively through an organization called Operation Lifesaver, whose sole mission is public awareness around the risk and danger of attempting to go across a crossing that's closed, of trespassing on train tracks. Their motto was see tracks, think trains, because a train can't just stop on a dime. like a car can. And so, we would love to see additional federal funding. It is a good partnership, I think, across the board, and it's one, I think Congressman Lamothe asked about, addressing driver behavior. Public awareness is a key way of doing that. On top of that, Chair Hamandi mentioned, technology in cars. As we continue to build more autonomous technology into cars, the ability is there to not allow a car to proceed with a block crossing, with a closed crossing. And so we think myriad tools exist. Railroads are going to do their part. We're going to work with communities. We're going to work with our regulators and our safety overseers. But it takes an all-the-above strategy.
Good. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back my time.
Thank you. We have two members left for questions. I think, Ms. Hamadi, I'm going to be up there at 12:30
I'm here
as well.
as long as
Okay.
you want me here.
All right. I now recognize Mr. Mann for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here, and thanks for this important hearing. A couple quick things, and this is for you, Mr. Bose. I represent the big first district of Kansas, which is the western two-thirds part of our state, except for the Wichita area. We've got 4,600 miles of active rail in our state. We have 4 Class I railroads, 13 short lines, and 2 switching and terminal railroads in Kansas. Moving goods across the state and country are vital for our ag industry and other industries as well. First question, and we've all kind of been in now a little bit. I understand this has come up a couple times here, but for you, Mr. Bose, the brake health effectiveness, what's the exact timeline for when we anticipate a response or an answer? Just as a member of Congress, my understanding is the technology's there. My understanding is labor's for it, the railroad's for it, waiting for approval. What's the exact, when are we going to get some kind of an answer or direction, and where exactly does it sit in the process?
Congressman, we're reviewing that petition. The FRA is, in terms of the timeline, I will get back to you with an exact timeline. There's comments that have to be addressed. There's safety that has to be looked at. I hope that FRA staff are in place and there's continuous funding so that they can look at waivers and review waivers. There's a multiple number of variables here that right now, I can't give you a specific timeline on that. We're actively reviewing that.
Okay, fair enough. Next question for you, Mr. Jeffries. In my district, we have rail crossings where the trains stop and you have emergency management vehicles. In a lot of rural communities, there's not a lot of other grade crossings or options. In your testimony, you mentioned how railroads are working on innovative approaches to address problematic crossings. What are some examples, and what do you need from us here in Congress as we all move forward?
Well, thank you for that. So, as you've probably heard, we strongly believe, I think everyone on this panel believes that, the best crossing is one that doesn't exist, but you can't eliminate every crossing out there. That's never going to happen. And so the second best way of addressing that is, one, working with the community, identifying, okay, do we have a chronically blocked crossing and why? Mr. Bose talked about our experience working together in Houston, where we addressed crossings on 19 critical roadways and have seen a decrease of over 60% in 6 months. So good progress there. So whether it's making operational changes, I know in Hammond, Indiana, we were able to change an interchange point that reduced, not eliminated all block crossings, but made a big chunk of difference. So whether it's using technology, whether it's operational changes, whether it's infrastructure investment, and then really in the event of a block crossing, making sure we're communicating to the public and to first responders so that they know about alternate routes or how long the crossing might be blocked. So all the above strategy, and would love to sit down and work with your office to see how we might best address what you're referring to.
Yeah, likewise. And last question for you, Chair Hamadi. Earlier with the question, I think your exact words were, it's not just resources. We've got to streamline the process, and every one of you nodded your head. How do we do that?
That's a great question. We do not have a recommendation on that. I'd be happy to work with the committee, just from a previous experience. But we can't have a situation where this takes years and years to address community concerns. And right now, we're looking at 7, 8, 9, 10 years for a lot of these projects. That's just not acceptable. That's not an improvement to safety.
That's right. And many times the resources are there. The will is there on all parties' parts. With inflation, the cost continues to go up, which you mentioned, Mr. Smith, and we have these multiple year delays makes no sense. These are solvable problems that we need to figure out.
They are solvable problems, but also, and Mr. Smith had mentioned, making sure that local entities have the resources that they need too, because a lot of times with these projects, a lot is put on local communities. If you just look at the Mendon accident, the Mendon, Missouri accident, when we were on scene, I went to visit the 3 local commissioners who mostly spend their days in their small businesses. They don't do grade crossing elimination or active crossings, and they looked at me and said, we don't know how to come up with this money, and we don't do environmental engineering work. How would we afford this? Now, luckily, FRA was on scene, Federal Highways I was able to call, and we pulled everybody together along with BNSF and the state and Amtrak to get a great solution. But that's not always available. So the locals need to know how to get the resources and where to go to get them.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you. I yield back the balance of my time, which I do not have.
Thank you. Gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Duarte for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it. Ms. Homedy, Chairman Homedy. Am I getting that even close?
Jennifer works.
Jennifer, thank you. John.
Yeah.
Good to see you. Speaking of the timeframes to put together some of these projects, 7, 8 years, one of the features of the recent Fiscal Responsibility Act that dealt with the debt ceiling was a very robust NEPA reform that I believe was long overdue, that put down that minor projects, except for the biggest project, should be accomplished within 1 year, and there should be a lead agency status. Has your group, to alleviate some of these time drags and time frame delays on these construction projects, looked at the new policies for National Environmental Policy Act under the Fiscal Responsibility Act to see if you could streamline?
We have not looked at that. Perhaps that's something that FRA has and others. Our mandate is to investigate an accident, but it's not something we've looked at.
Administrator Bose, have you looked at the NEPA reform policies under the Fiscal Responsibility Act, signed by the President, bipartisan legislation, to see if you can streamline some of these projects and make them easier, cheaper, faster?
Yes, sir. We're actively looking at that and also working across different agencies, because these programs are road program. It can be a road project as well, so that involves another agency, but we are.
Great. So can we expect you to bring back to us what you find, how you're going to help guide these programs along faster and be ultimately responsive to the NEPA reforms under the Fiscal Responsibility Act?
We can do that.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Director Bose, we have a big pushback from this administration against pipelines. We don't seem to want to build pipelines for natural gas. We don't want to build pipelines for crude oil movement anymore. How has energy transport, as we've backed off the pipeline approach and moved a lot of energy transportation, oil and gas mainly, to rail, impacted the capacities, the safety of rail in the United States? And what is your forecast for how a continuing growing economy? We just set records in oil production, which means we're setting records in gas production. How are you planning for the increased movement of these energy products by rail, since we're not building pipelines? And what is the relative safety and economics of moving these energy resources by rail versus pipeline?
Congressman, thank you for that question. I had an opportunity over the summer to visit the Bakken in North Dakota. I happened to be at FRA in the 2012-2013 and at Department of Transportation timeframe when there was a growth in that sector, and there was a lot of issues related to oil being moved on trains. That has subsequently improved. When I was at the Bakken, and it just may have been at the moment of time, there's actually a lot of shuttered terminals up there at that time. As long as there is domestic growth and the product can be moved safely in rail, in the right tank cars, and the rail industry is producing the right types of tank cars to transport those commodities, FRA will be there to make sure that they're transported in a safe manner.
Thank you. Looking at the California Air Board, my district is a Central Valley district with many food producers and food processors. We have the Modesto and Empire Traction Company that connects the old Santa Fe lane with the Union Pacific lines along that small short rail system, family-owned, are the biggest canneries in the world, some of the biggest food processors in the world, Gallo Winery, the largest winery in the world. Our food system is greatly reliant not only upon, local short lines such as Modesto and Empire Traction Company, but also many of these entities themselves, whether they make pie filling with corn syrup or they fill grain elevators to feed our poultry and dairy industries, have their own small locomotives that are there to position cars through their hoppers, and very short private rail systems that will be greatly impacted by the elimination of diesel locomotives. It might be 10 years old, but they're far from worn out, and they're only incidentally used. I'm just going to admonish you to be very sensitive to elimination of short rail lines. And in my final seconds, I'll tell you, we can't even get electrical hookups from Pacific Gas and Electrics in large parts of my district. So the prospect of using electrical units for any of these replacements is impossible. We can't even put in a new housing development or retail outlet in the town of Madera because PG&E has a 2-year wait that has been a 2-year wait for 3 years now for any new electrical hookup. So there is no feasibility to comply with some of these ultra-low emissions standards.
The gentleman's
I'll
time
yield
has
back.
expired. Thank you. I know Mr. Molinaro has 2 questions. I think the first one is for you, Ms. Hamandi, and then after you answer, you can feel free to be excused. Okay, all right.
I know who funds us.
And I
All
have.
right. Mr.
Go on.
Molinaro, please.
Jennifer, I'm very grateful to you.
Thank you.
If it helps, I will, however, start in reverse, Mr. Chairman. And so you spoke obviously about the NTSB's vital role in seeing what obviously goes wrong in transportation issues, and we've acknowledged obviously some of our concerns. I was glad to vote in committee and on the House floor to support increased funding and reauthorization of the NTSB, which you duly noted, which was included in the FAA reauthorization. Specifically in your testimony, you mentioned rail worker safety at grade crossings, and I, for one, want to join my colleagues and acknowledge the work of the men and women who provide for rail safety around this country. They provide for our national economy, and of course, we're grateful for their hard work. In your testimony, you also discussed a number of reoccurring safety issues at grade crossings. Can you just put a highlight for the folks in upstate New York in particular to the specific few recommendations that you would recommend to ensure such safety issues don't happen again? I just want to reinforce that message.
Yeah, on grade crossings themselves, it's grade crossing design, it's technology to prevent grade crossing collisions, and of course, increasing or improving rail worker safety. But at grade crossings themselves, with respect to design, we've looked at at the profile of crossings to make sure that they are designed, constructed, and maintained in a safe manner so that vehicles aren't getting stuck on humped crossings. We've looked at traffic cues at grade crossings. We've seen that adequate line of sight to ensure vegetation doesn't prevent drivers from seeing as they pass maybe passive grade crossings, and most importantly, improving passive grade crossings so that they become active crossings with lights, gates.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And Administrator Bose, I just want to turn to the CRISI grants in particular. I remain a strong advocate for implementation and use of those dollars. The program, of course, helps short-line railroads repair and rehabilitate worn-out and track rail infrastructure, specifically in parts of the country like upstate New York, where infrastructure is exceptionally dated. And frankly, these grants make a significant impact. Now, I've requested the Appropriations Committee provide increased funding for the CRISI program, and we'll continue to advocate for overall support of the program. That said, like some of my colleagues, and certainly those I represent, I share concern that much of the funding available, and with obviously much of the nation turning perhaps to electoral politics in the next couple of months, the administration may not be as focused on getting those dollars on the ground. and addressing the needs of the short line projects that ultimately apply. Can you give commitment that the FRA will take proper amount of time and more efficiently review many of those short line projects that will apply next for CRISI grants?
Congressman, you have my word on that, and I would just note, we have $700 million that we awarded to short line railroads, a historic level just in 2023, but I understand your point, and we want to do that expeditiously.
Yeah, so I live in a part of the state that, quite frankly, or part of the country that has seen the deterioration of that infrastructure, and despite the massive amount of funding, too often those dollars don't effectively get on the ground in an efficient way. And certainly I would note, in closing, Mr. Chairman, because I know time's of the essence, in the part of the state that I represent, Binghamton, New York, the southern tier, massive investment over the years, but deterioration of the infrastructure is not only impacting the safety of the short lines themselves, but of the communities therein, and it's just necessary to move those dollars a bit more effectively and efficiently. And with that, Mr. Chair.
Wait, don't yield back. May I just say thank you for your support of the NTSB and for funding and our reauthorization bill as part of the FAA bill. I say that sincerely because our authorization expired at the end of FY22, and it makes a real difference when you're a small agency with such a small budget. If you don't have an authorization, we are constantly begging for what our next budget will be. It makes a big difference. So appreciate all your work on the committee. Thank you for your support of the NTSB. Now you can yield back.
We're gonna yield your last 10 seconds to Mr. Payne here for one last question.
Thank you for the indulgence of the chair. And Ms. Hamady, just while I had you here, I couldn't help but ask in reference to autonomous vehicles, in the context of rail. What is your thoughts on?
I would have real concerns with our railroads being the test bed for autonomous vehicles. If you just look at the investigations that we've conducted on autonomous vehicles on our roads, there are a lot of safety lessons to be learned there. I would not want to see a 2 to 3 mile long train, much less a 4 mile train, which I once saw a contest for, with nobody on board. I mean, let me tell you, in East Palestine, that crew did an amazing job. In a situation where you have, 149 rail cars, distributed power unit, and a locomotive, I don't want to see that going down the track with nobody on board.
Thank you. And
To be clear, no one is suggesting that.
I just think you said it could be a test bed. Okay.
Thank you.
I love Ian.
Yield back.
The gentleman yields. Are there any further questions from any members of the committee who have not been recognized? Seeing none, this concludes our hearing for today. I'd like to thank each one of you, each one of our witnesses for your testimony. The committee stands adjourned.